How's it going, everyone? Welcome. Euler Gonzalez here. So, in today's video, I want to look at the absolute positioning, but by reading is the spec, and also put at practice those concepts and combine them with this particular course taught by Josh Komoa, a software engineer that previously worked at Khan Academy, one of the first large company ever used React at scale, and then after that he went to Gatsby. And in the meantime, he showed off several, or he was invited to several workshops. So now, in 2020, he started developing this particular course to teach a couple of things. First is React, then is CSS for JavaScript developer, which is what I'm currently looking at in today's video. And then you have now the animations here. So let's take a look at this. So the TLDR of how do I get here is because during the learning experience of CSS, a lot of the times I didn't know what to do. So I was just guessing or reading or looking at here and there from NDN docs and trying to kind of develop an intuition around that. Those days are over. The reason for that is I don't want to continuously spend and dedicate time to going into the spec or the MDN docs or any other docs. I just want to truly understand this, because once I've done that, first I can look at where the source it came from. Second, I can now explore, which is one of the reasons why we are here in the AI developing with agents and all the kind of stuff, is because it's do the exploration. And last but not least is to finally consolidate is the understanding that any time that the spec change, I know where to look. I know where or how to read the spec. So this is something that I don't know if most web developers actually do, or for example, C and C++ developers, they actually quite familiar with the spec by reading is the book from the author, right? But here in the web, most web developers, they are not quite familiar with this spec. And again, this is a journey. It is a marathon. You do better one day at a time. And this is exactly what I'm going to do in today's video. So this is the absolute positioning. So briefly describing is what CSS is, that at the end of the day, this is to style documents. Documents that can be is hypertext media, the HTML, or it can be math documents where you want to show is mathematical formulas, SVG, which is, hey, this is a document for showing now scalable vector graphics, okay, or XML. So any other document that you want to express. But here is the core concept of the CSS. It allows us to describe the styling of a particular document. Most of the time here on the web, we use is the HTML, sorry. So all of these documents, which was originally developed by the CERN, I want to make a quick pause there. Come on. It's like the CERN, right? I don't know how do you say that in English. Please tell me. Please. The CERN. The CERN. Oh my god. The CERN, but in English, man. All right. Holy moly, that's interesting. In Spanish, you have now this, the bright month, but in English, it's like no. Okay, anyway. So the organizations European pour la Recherche, okay, Organisation Européenne pour la Recherche Nucléaire. Oh, it is French. At the end of the day, interesting. Organisation Européenne pour la Recherche Nucléaire. That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. It was established in 1954. It is based in Meyrin, a western suburb of Geneva, on the France-Switzerland border. Why always the Swiss have to be involved in any world-changing thing, bro? World-changing events. Anyway, but this is what CERN is. I just want to know is the name of the CERN. All right. The acronym CERN originally represents the French word Conseil Européen. Okay. Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire. European Council for Nuclear Research. That's interesting. This comes from France. Okay, got it. Again, this is part of the filling the gaps in my knowledge. The CERN, the Conseil, okay, the Conseil, yeah, the Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire. Conseil. How do you say this? I don't want to mess that up or butcher up that in Spanish or in pronunciation. That's right. You got it. It's okay. French. Oh my god. Oh, really? How to pronounce CERN correctly in French? Oh my god. French pronunciation guy, bro.
CERN.
Ah, CERN. Oh my god, there is a... Okay. Not just the acronym. Okay. And that was 2020. Conseil. Exactly. It's not can, it's con. Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire. CERN.
Conseil européen pour la recherche nucléaire.
Faster?
Conseil européen
Conseil européen
pour la recherche nucléaire.
Everything in French sounds like creamy, you know.
Conseil européen pour la recherche nucléaire.
Oh, it is a French. Exactly. This is that. Okay. Ignorance about what document. Yeah. Okay, so Conseil, Conseil, Conseil Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire. That's what this CERN means at the end of the day. Interesting. Got it. All right. Okay. So this is the CERN, and this was developed by this nuclear research, and it's interesting that this is being called the Recherche Nucléaire because at the end of the day, the entire network or ARPANET, which was created by the DARPA, the developing agency, the developing advanced research, developing advanced research defense agency. I think it's that DARPA, right? Exactly. Defense advanced defense advanced research. Okay. Defense advanced research projects, but that's what it is, you know. Yeah. So at the end of the day, is this, you know, defense advanced research. So this defense advanced research, which at the end of the day, that's what the document. This is what the entire network was created, right? As a response by Eisenhower to what the Russian did back in 1957 when they deployed the first satellite around the globe. So over the years, this DARPA so now find out very interesting to what the universities were doing about sharing documents, and they now started to invest on those kind of research. So that's what we have, for example, is the protocol of how these computers communicate to each other, the command and control, known as the TCP and IP. And then, as I mentioned before, is how all of these networks of computers, when you need to share documents, you can do that. And we need to find is a protocol and a standard to define them. So it all starts here in as part of the research here. So right now I'm looking inside the CSS positioning layout model level 3. Okay, because that at the end of the day, since the reason of exploring this particularly sections and the positioning sections is to actually make sense of all of this. All right. So CSS, as I mentioned earlier, allow you to style in documents. Most of the time, HTML documents, and yeah, it allows you to style in CSS documents. Documents in this case, like hypertext that allows to represent is different elements in these documents. So not only grouping sections, but contents or embedded media like the video, audio, or even canvas. So if you want to now interact with these documents, it is important to at least understand is the foundations. So that you need to know is how to select those elements, how you can apply certain rules, how you can even select those elements based on a state like pseudo classes or pseudo elements, and how you can is use some of the built-in CSS functions conveniently that we can go with CSS, and the rules or behavior that CSS allows us to use to apply certain rules. And understanding is what the CSS box model is. And also is part of these foundations is, well, you need to understand what the CSS rule is, the anatomy of this rule, what is a selector, what is a pseudo elements, pseudo state, the common pseudo selectors and states that are relevant here in 2026, okay, and also how can the unit, the possible units that we can have in CSS, so measurements and keywords, colors, whether it's keywords, RGB, the different formats of color, keyword, RGB, HSL, and OCLA, which is a new format, the typographies, so what is sans serif and serif, what are web fonts, what are the different variants that we can have is in this typography, the character set, so variants like normal, regular, bold, and italic, and the operations that we can do on the text, so like line height, letter spacings, alignments, and that is the foundations of CSS. And when you started to now creating this particular document and styling them, initially you have is the layout, the OG layout, the normal flow, right, or the flow layout. So this mode, these algorithms indicate how all of these elements is going to be interact with each other. And it turns out that in order to describe these elements on visual screen, or whether it's like print media or screen like this, the specs say that's going to represent all of these elements as a box, and this box has an anatomy. So you have now the content, the pattern, the border, and the margin, all right? And in order to calculate the dimension, you have now the width and the height algorithms. Each one of those properties has its values like keywords and the measurement, all right? And when it comes to understand the possible type of boxes that we can have in this layout, you have now block, inline block, and inline, right? And the behaviors among them. So block allows you to define it as dimension, but it's gonna take all the available space, and it is greedy. Unlike inline elements, you can modify it as dimension. It's gonna be as small as possible. It's gonna shrink and fit the content, but you can now line break is. And the block inline is that it's gonna behave like an inline element inside, but in the outside world is gonna allow you to modify it as dimension. So and also how now, for example, margins collapse. So this is just to understand is the OG layer, right? Now, when you need to put elements out of the normal flow, right? Because so far we have created is all of these documents and styling them in a nicely orderly fashion. But when we need to put elements outside of that, then you have a different layout mode. And this is what the CSS is made of. Is several layout algorithms that depend on where you are, it allows you to behave, or it makes these boxes to behave in a certain way. So on that topic, which is what I'm looking right now, is with the rendering logic here in positioning. So the this layout mode, you have now different layouts here. Sorry, you in this layout mode, the positioning layout, you have different possible values here. So the first is the relative, and anytime that you open into an element, a box, when you promote that element to a box, to a positioning layout, two things happens. First, it allows you to add or define additional properties, the positioning property of that box, and the other is set constraints to the children nodes. So for the relative positioning, when you open to that, by default is going to behave like an element in the normal flow, in the flow layer. It's going to put that in the nicely orderly fashion. When you're starting to modify these positions, unlike, for example, elements in the margins, it will modify the layout, by the way, right? So I also look at what is the default positioning of this relative element, and that'll be based on the order in the DOM. And this is pretty much what relative is. And the other mode in the positioning layout is absolute. So sometimes you want your contents to now be on top of another one. All right. So for example, a sub-menu bar and UI elements, or any dialogues or modal, and for those, or even for animations here, elements that you want to overlap on top of another one. Something that I already mentioned with, for example, is the GTA 5 website. That's a very lovely website. You can take a look at that later. But when you do here now, well, again, two things happen. So by default, the elements when you open to an absolute is going to behave like a normal on the normal flow. But when you modify this position, so now it is default place is going to be close to the container block element, or the container block. In other words, it's going to look up what is the closest positioning relative element, and from there anchor that element, and that'll be is the position where the browser is going to render it, right? So that makes a lot of sense, because unlike positioning relative, when all of these elements are now, when you don't modify this position, all of these elements are now put in a nicely way, in an orderly. All of these elements are put in an orderly. All of these elements are put in this orderly, exactly. All of these elements are putting in that orderly, nicely fashion, right? So it means that it's going to be next to each other. But in the case of the absolute positioning, so these elements now, so not only they don't modify the layout, but all of these elements on the layout is going to be on top of that. So you can, so they act like an holograph. particularly the content. So you now pulling elements out of the flow. Those elements, when you modify its positions, they're going to act as a transparent content as long as you don't modify is the background, right? So for example here, okay, it's not reloading. Okay, it's not reloading. In any case, and they also have a particular behavior, which is if you define now a children elements and absolute, its pattern will collapse. This is the behavior here. And sometimes you want to make that happen to fill the container, but then you should now use a different tools to allow you achieve that behavior. And the other is that the dimension of the absolute size. So what is the dimensions of these elements? And that is that when you use now, for example, relative or absolute, it makes sense that the content is of the dimension of that box, absolute box, is fit the content. But if this content now grows and grows and grows, especially on text, it's going to find ways to do a soft or a soft wrapping on that content. If the content cannot break and it continues to grow, it's going to now cause this overflow, right? Despite that the box here was already defined here. This is true, for example, when you now have elements like, for example, here, like block here, right? Where, oh, come on. Don't come with that, please. Don't come with that. Come on, come on. So, for example, like in this, right? You say, hey, now I want to these elements here. And if you're trying to, for example, modify is the normal flow or try to play with another layouts. So layouts are specific to, so layouts apply to a specific, so layouts apply to boxes, and they allow you to add additional property to interact with them. There are few exceptions for this rule to mix one layout to another, but usually when you promote one box to a layout, they're gonna stick with that particular layout. So if I remove here now the positioning, right, with the display is now going to grow onto this containing block, right? If I use position absolute, it will do the same. If I try to go with the relative, right, it's gonna now overflow the content, which is quite interesting. Unlike absolute, right, where the idea here is that this box where is contained, the size, it'll be in up to the closing containing elements. In other words, in this case, the viewport, right? And that's interesting. Whereas if you are in the relative, right, you are now affecting is the so you're putting these elements out of the flow here, or you are overflowing that content. So again, all of this is because this particular mode has its own behaviors. So I also look at how to centering trick with elements in the absolute positioning, right? Remember, when you open into an element into an absolute positioning, you can modify its property. You are telling to CSS to put all of these elements into perhaps in impossible situations. So put these elements on the top right, left, and bottom, right? And the content here, let's going to take all the available space in the left, in all directions, and that'll be cost to center that. However, you need to define is the dimension for the border box. Otherwise, it's gonna take all the available space, right? Remember the box model, right? So this is good because now on the containing block here, right? In CSS, every HTML element has a containing block. A containing block is a rectangle that forms the bounds of an element's containers. And in flow layouts, elements are contained by their parents. For example, this paragraph is contained by its parent section. To be precise, yeah, but it is parent sections. To be precise, the paragraph is contained by a containing block. The size and the shape of the parent element's content box is something like this. All right. So flow layout use containing blocks to figuring out where on the screen to place element. When it comes to absolute positioning, and it says something interesting, which is known as the containing block. The question is that if I look at here in the positioning, and if I ask that concept containing block, oh, there you got it. This is the concept here. Containing block of positioning boxes. Again, I just want to briefly mention here something. CSS right now, it is made of, or is developed independently per modules. You can take a look at here, right, at the working draft to, I don't think it's this, in any case. Issue index, property index, index here for this model, conformance. Yeah, what I'm looking here is conformance and requirement recommendations. No, is, well, in any case, again, that goes beyond up to the video, but I'm about to show that later on, which is CSS is developing independently per model. So you have things like, let me do this real quick, which is CSS spec. Okay, let me take a look at this spec, right? And here we are, right? So this is the spec here. This page contains a description of all the specifications that the CSS working group is working on. See the current work page for a compact view and how to give a feedback to this. So this is all the different models that is being developed independently, right? So you have now the CS color, all right? So you have now the color level, you have namespace, selectors, media query, cascading inheritance, fonts, writing mode, something that I already mentioned, or something that I forgot to mention, but it is important, basic user interface, the box model, and containing here. This is all complete. And some of these additional models here. Some of them are still on revision here. But let me see if I can abandon rewritings. Understanding the CSS specifications. Okay, learning the foundations. Right? Read carefully the following CSS spec, since the concepts in these sections are crucial to understand the rest of the spec. So cascading, value, defaulting. Okay, defaulting. CSS values and units, CSS displayed, which is the original layout, right? The display models, the CSS display glossary as well, right? Block container and things like that. You know, this concept of containing block is something that is present here. Again, I don't want to overload you with all of this thing, but by looking at the spec here, right, has written a useful how to read the W3 spec from Elisa Barr in 2001. That's very, very interesting. Word for the wise, I hate definitions. That was reading in 2001, bro. Oh my god. Exactly. Be patient and persisting, and you will be amazed at the amount of information you two can extract from W3C spec. Realize that the W3C specs are written for implementers, not end users. Many specifications contain a section that tells you how they are organizing and how you should read them. Know the vocabulary the specification used. Remember that you don't have to read every word. Skim the parts that make sense. Avoid discussions of namespace. Learn to read BNF. It is using a lot of space. Learn to read the DTM for answer the syntax questions, and be patient. It's a programmer here. That's interesting. But it all boils down to that, right? To GB AZ. Okay, he hosts a website here. Lang intro. Korean, modern Greek, trip reports. Okay, Russian. Start learning Russian alphabet here. Okay, so he created this particular website. Last update 28 January 2025. Added German. That's not German. That's German. Language tutorials. For example, like Russians. Interesting. Okay. Start learning Russian. You keep saying easy. A different game. Okay. Da. Niet. And then some word. Interesting. Okay. Okay. So he actually did this. Okay.
Что это?
So это. Okay. Is this food?
Это еда. Это дача. Да, это еда. Это еда.
Это еда. Okay. That's interesting. And so on and so forth, you know? Okay, got it. Even people like them actually tell you what you should start doing, bro. Right? Interesting. This tutorial is designed as a beginner point for casual learning. It requires a modern 2006 or later browser, and is already dropped that. Dr. Walter Strength of San State University, who first taught me Russian. Thanks also to Amelia Bellamy-Royds, who tested the updates versions and pointed out several problems in this. Okay, anyway, that's not what I'm here, but this is the reason why I'm actually reading this spec here. Okay, is to start with the foundations, like this, right? Read carefully the CSS, so get yourself familiar with all of this. Also with the viewport, sizing, interest in something that I'm describing, box sizing, Okay, which is part of the algorithm, right? The width and the height algorithm here, and how that is being calculated, and the CSS writing modes as well. So I do think that that'll be all for today's video. With this concept, with the notion of absolute positioning here, so it means that across different layout modes, all of them have this concept of the containing block, right? So here this is the positioning layout mode, but also is on the display introduction, which is the OG level, or the OG layout here, right? So if I go here in the introduction, I read about that notion, and that's interesting, very, very interesting. All the possible options that you can have, right? And the values here. So I also look at just the most common one, right? Outer display role for flow layout, block inline and run in. Inner display layout mode, flow root, flex, grid, Ruby. Interesting. Something that we're gonna see that later on, like this display flow. Hey, display like a block and inline layout, right? Like this. Otherwise, you generate a block container. You know, the concept here of block container makes sense, makes a ton of sense. So, yeah, that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.